Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's video we will delve into another HTML5 element, the aside element. But before we start, this channel grows with your support. If you like the content, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and feel free to add a comment or a suggestion in the comment section below. Alright, let's begin. The aside element in HTML5 is used to define content that is tangentially related to the main content of a web page. It typically contains supplementary information such as sidebars, pull quotes, related links, advertisements, or other content that can enhance the main content but is not central to it. Purpose of the aside element. The main purpose of the aside element is to group content that is related to the surrounding content but is not part of the main flow. This can help structure your web page in a way that distinguishes between primary and secondary content. Role of the aside element in document structure. The aside element is part of the family of semantic HTML5 elements, which are designed to provide meaning to the content and structure of a web page. Unlike the div element, which is purely for layout purposes, aside adds semantic value by indicating that its content is tangential or supplementary to the main content. Semantic versus structural impact. The semantic impact of the aside element is meaningful, especially for accessibility tools, search engines. However, the structural impact is minimal in terms of how the document is rendered. Unlike the section and the article element, which could directly alter the page's hierarchical structure, the aside is more of a complementary role within the flow of the content. Common types of content inside the aside element. First, we have related articles or links. Links to articles or pages that are relevant to the main content but not part of it. For example, on a blog post, an aside element could contain links to related blog posts or external resources. Second, the author information or bio. Short author bios can be placed in an aside element to give context about the writer or creator of the content. Advertisements or promotions. Promotional content, including banners, product ads, or special offers, is commonly placed in the aside element because they are supplementary to the page's main narrative. Quotes or side notes. Important quotes or side notes that add extra context or information but are not essential to the core content. There is also call to action sections, encouraging the user to take a specific action like signing up for a newsletter or downloading a resource can be part of an aside element. Sidebar content. In many designs, the sidebar is a perfect place for an aside element. Sidebars often include navigation links, search bars, or extra information. Event announcements or news. Events like upcoming webinars or important news that is related but not central to the page's primary content. Footnotes or citations. Additional citations or explanatory notes that provide context or credit to the external resource can be placed in an aside element. Contact information or help. Contact forms, customer support details, or help documentation that is useful but not the main focus of the page. And finally, we have social media links or feeds. Links to social media accounts or embedded social media feeds like X or Instagram. So where is the best place to add the aside element? The placement of the aside element depends on its role on the page. Here are a few common places to consider. Inside an article or a section element. When you have supplementary content that relates directly to the main content, such as related links, additional notes, or citations, you can place the aside element inside an article or a section element. This makes it clear that the aside aside element content is relevant to that particular section or article. In this example, the aside element provides related links specifically relevant to the article content outside the main content as a sidebar. If the content is supplementary to multiple sections or the entire page, you might want to place the aside outside of the main content block as a sidebar. This is useful for content that is related to the whole page, such as navigation links, promotions, or advertisements. Here in this example, the aside element is independent of the article element and applies to the whole page. Nested in headers or footers. Though less common, you can also place a side element in the header or footer when you have content that is tangential to the navigation or general information about the site. For example, in the footer over here, you can add extra information such as legal notices with the nav element. Though not as common, you could place an aside element within or near the nav element, particularly when adding helpful tips or extra information related to navigation. For example, search bars, site maps, and so on. By carefully considering where and when to use the aside element, you can make your page more understandable, accessible, and organized. Multiple aside elements. You can use multiple aside elements in a single web page, each serving different purposes. For example, one aside element could be used for a sidebar containing navigation links. Another aside element could hold related articles within a blog post. A third aside could feature advertisements or promotional content. This approach allows you to include multiple pieces of supplementary content on the same page, clearly separating different types of related information using the aside element. Nesting aside elements. You can nest an aside element inside other elements like the article or section, or even another aside element if it makes sense in your content structure. For example, you might have an aside for a sidebar, and within that you could have another aside for an advertisement. In this case, the outer aside represents a sidebar. The nested aside inside the used for an advertisement within the sidebar still related to the sidebar but providing its own supplementary content. While adding the aside element multiple times or nesting the aside element, it is important to consider whether it makes sense semantically and is actually necessary. Common mistakes and errors. Using aside for main content. Placing primary or essential content inside an aside element is a mistake. The purpose of an aside element is to provide supplementary or tangential content that support the main content of the page. If you place primary content such as the main article, key information, or anything crucial to understanding the page inside an aside element, it leads to semantic confusion and can affect search engine optimization and accessibility. So reserve the aside element for non-essential content like sidebars, related links, or advertisements. Use elements like the main element, article, or section for the primary content. Using the aside element for unrelated content. Including content in aside element that is not related to the primary content of the page or section. The aside element should be used for content related to the main article, section, or page. If you add completely unrelated material such as unrelated advertisements, random navigation links, links or off-topic information, it confuses the user and reduces the page's semantic meaning. And for this, ensure that the content within the aside element is relevant to the primary material. For example, in an article about web development, an aside could include links to another web development resources or tips, but should not include unrelated topics like sports or news, for example. Overusing aside element, adding too many aside elements on a single page. Overusing the aside element can overwhelm users, especially if there are multiple unrelated or excessive supplementary sections. This dilutes the importance of supplementary content and may clutter the user interface. Use the aside element only include tangential content when it's truly useful to the reader. If you need to include multiple pieces of supplementary information, consider grouping them within a single aside element instead of using multiple aside tags. Using aside for navigation menus. Placing the website's primary or secondary navigation inside an aside element. Navigation is not supplementary content. It is a core part of the website structure and functionality. Using the aside element for navigation misrepresents the meaning of both the aside element and the nav element, leading to confusion for users and screen readers. Use the nav element for navigation menus even if those menus are located in a sidebar. The aside element should be reserved for other supplementary content. Not using a heading in an aside element. Not including a clear heading such as H2, H3 and so on within the aside element to describe its content. Without a heading, it may be unclear what the content in the aside represents, especially for users with screen readers. It also reduces the semantic value of the aside for search engine optimization purposes. Always include a relevant heading inside the aside element to clarify its purpose. This improves accessibility and provides clear organization to the content. Avoiding these mistakes ensures that your use of aside element aligns with its intended purpose, providing clear and useful supplementary content that improves the overall structure and usability of your web page. We have reached the end of today's video. I hope it was useful. Thank you all for watching.